Shortly after the film, I was speaking to about 600 trial lawyers on the East Coast, not on the Kennedy case, but I gave a speech called Tactics and Techniques in the Trial of a Criminal Case. And during the Q&A period that followed, there were some questions asked about the Kennedy assassination, and I could tell by the rhetorical tone of the question that the questioner believed that there was a conspiracy. So I asked for a show of hands. How many of you folks believe in a conspiracy? And a vast number, just a forest of hands were elevated. It seemed like 90% of the audience. I said, what if I could convince you people, and you're all intelligent people, although some people may quarrel with that assessment about lawyers, but I said, what if I could convince you in less than 1 minute that you're not thinking very clearly about this case, you're not thinking intelligently about this case? In less than a minute, I said. And there was kind of a murmur out there. What's this guy talking about, Finally, someone shouted off in the right front, we don't think you can do it. I said, all right, you start looking at your watch. Let's see if I can do it. I don't remember my exact words, but here's the essence of it. I said, I'd like to have another show of hands of people who either saw the JFK movie that had just come out, or at any time in the past read a book or a magazine article or a column propounding the conspiracy theory or otherwise rejecting the findings of the Warren Commission. Again, this vast forest of hands. It looked like the same number of people as before. I said, I don't need a show of hands for my second point. I said, I think you all agree that before you form an intelligent opinion upon a matter in dispute, you should hear both sides of the story. Like the old West Virginia mountaineer said, no matter how thin I make my pancakes, they always have two sides. I said, with that thought in mind, how many of you have read the Warren report? It was embarrassing. 5, 10 hands were raised. It was embarrassing. I had proved my point. Someone said it was about 47 seconds. They had formed an opinion rejecting the findings of the Warren Commission, and they hadn't read the Warren report. If I could condense the billions upon billions of words written on this case on the two main issues, did Oswald kill Kennedy and was there a conspiracy? Let's see if I can do that in a couple minutes on each of these issues. With respect to Oswald's guilt, for my career as a prosecutor, and I think this is just common sense, you don't have to be a prosecutor, if you're innocent of a crime, chances are there's not going to be any evidence at all pointing towards your guilt. Nothing at all. Why? Because you're innocent. But now and then, because of the nature of life and the unaccountability of things, now and then there may be a piece of evidence pointing towards your guilt, even though you're innocent, and in very unusual and rare cases, maybe even 2 things, maybe even 3 things, pointing directly at your guilt, even though you're completely innocent. But in this case here, everything that Oswald did, everything he said, all the physical evidence, all the scientific evidence, everything points towards Oswald's guilt. In Reclaiming History, I set forth 53 pieces of evidence pointing towards Oswald's guilt. And under those circumstances, it would not be humanly possible, let me reiterate that, under those circumstances, with 53 pieces of evidence pointing towards guilt, it would not be humanly possible for Oswald to be innocent. At least not in the world in which we live. I'm talking to you folks, you can hear me, there's going to be a dawn tomorrow. Not in that world. Only in a fantasy world can you have 53 pieces of evidence pointing towards your guilt and still be innocent. Let me just go over a couple of the pieces of evidence with you. Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle was the murder weapon. I mean, come on, that's pretty strong evidence, right? The murder weapon was Oswald's. Of all the stock boys here in the building, he's the only one that flees the building after the shooting. There's a roll call. Where's Oswald? He's the only one that took off. 45 minutes later, Oswald shoots and kills Officer J.D. Tippett, the Dallas Police Department. I told the jury in London that that murder bore the signature of a man in desperate flight from some awful deed. 30 minutes later, Oswald resists arrest, pulls a gun on the arresting officer. During his interrogation, he told one provable lie after another, all of which show a consciousness of guilt. One lie he told showed a couple things. Number one, he was lying, and number two, he was pretty sharp. He said, I've never owned a rifle in my life. So they show him a photograph, the backyard photograph, holding the Carcano. And he says, well, that's my head, but it was superimposed in someone else's body. Pretty quick thinking. when people tell me that they think Oswald is innocent, and most of the major authors that write conspiracy books, they don't just talk about conspiracy, they talk about Oswald being innocent, and I got the quotes in the book. When they tell me that they think Oswald's innocent, I know one of two things. They're either completely unaware of the evidence or they're just some silly person.